Namaste. I and you pray. Hopefully not to each other, right? The Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, translated by James Haughton Woods. If such an idea as that of existence is erroneous, then such an idea is caused by existence or something of the kind as this, that there are no wholes having parts, would also be erroneous, because its object also, insofar as it is something to be determined, is certainly nothing coarse, and this latter is not concerned with definite and latter impressions. And this object does not exist. Such is the meaning of the argument, and if it be asked why there is no object, the reply is with the word whatever, and the apparent contradiction must be removed in accordance with explanation upapatte previously given, based on identity in difference and on manifoldness and in mutations. Then all would be satisfactory. 44. By this same balanced state, as the reflective and the superreflective balanced states are explained as having subtle objects. Of these two, that is called the reflective savichara balanced state, which refers to the subtle elements, the apparent forms of which have been manifested and which are characterized by an experience of place and time and cause. In this cause also a subtle element capable of being apperceived by one idea and particularized by uprisen uditta apparent form serves as that upon which this concentrated insight rests. But that balanced state which in all ways and by all means refers to such subtle elements as are free from characterization by apparent forms, whatever quiescent chanta, are uprisen uditta, are indeterminable avyapaditya, and of which yet corresponds to the apparent forms, in which the essence of all apparent forms is called superreflective nirvichara. Since the subtle element is of this kind, it becomes in this very form that on which the concentrated insight rests, and it influences the insight itself. When, moreover, the insight becomes, as it were, emptied of itself and becomes the intended object and nothing more, then it is called superreflective. Of these, four, the deliberate and the superdeliberate have as an object something great, whilst the reflective and the superreflective have a subtle object. Thus, by the same superdeliberative balanced state, the destruction of predicate relations of both kinds has been explained. 44. By this same, the reflective and the superreflective are explained as having subtle objects. Those whose apparent forms have been manifested are those by which the apparent forms of such things as water jars have been manifested. In other words, those that have included the apparent forms of such things as water jugs, place, for instance, above or below, are at one side, time, for instance, the presence, cause, for instance, the atom of earth, is produced by the 5 fine elements, among which the fine element of odor predominates. Likewise, the atom of water is produced from the 4 fine elements, among which the fine element of taste predominates. Likewise, the atom of fire is produced from the 3 fine elements, excluding the fine element of odor and of taste, and among which the fine element of color predominates. Likewise, the atom of wind is produced from the 2 fine elements beginning with odor, and of which 2 the fine element of touch predominates. Likewise, the atom of air from the fine element sound alone. This is the cause in the case of the subtle elements. These subtle elements are experienced when they have a place and a time and a cause. An idea, buddhi, which is capable of being particularized, does not follow unless it be particularized by such an experience. An objector might ask what similarity is there between the balanced state with deliberation and that with reflection. In reply to this, he says, in that case also, for the atom of earth, which consists of the conglomerations of the 5 fine elements, may be apperceived by a single idea. Similarly, the atom of water and the other atoms too, which have as their existence as have their essences 4 or 3 or 2, are one fine element, may be apperceived by a single idea. Upperism means a present apparent form. The element would be particularized by that. And finally, with regard to this upperism apparent form, it is pointed out that there is an interpenetration of this predicate relation of the verbal communications and of inferences by the memory of the conventional use of words. For when something coarse is the object of perception, the atoms do not appear, but as they do appear objectively as the result of verbal communications and of inferences. Thus it is consistent that this balanced state should be confused. He describes the super-reflective balanced state in the words, but that which, in all ways means in all forms of phenomenalization, such as blue and yellow. The termination, tas, pon 4, 3, 13, in the word sarvatas is used as equivalent to the inflected case endings. In other words, it means by all means, that is, by experiences of place and of time and of cause. By this statement, it is shown that the atoms as such are not particularized by time, neither are they particularized by time immediately through apparent forms, which have their origins in these atoms. It is this that he describes in the word quiescent. Quiescent are past, upperism are present, indeterminable are future apparent forms. Atoms are not quite characterized by these. Not being characterized by the apparent forms, it is quite all right to say that atoms are unrelated to them. In reply to this, he says, correspond to all apparent forms. With which kind of a relation do these atoms correspond to apparent forms? In reply to this, he says, are the essence of all apparent forms. In other words, the apparent forms are different from the atoms in some respects, and in other respects not different. But why has this balanced state this kind of an object? In reply to this, he says, sense of this character. In other words, having an aberration of the thatness of a perceptible object, it does not become active with regard to that which is not this thatness, having cited the object of this balanced state. He tells us what is in itself by saying, moreover, the insight, bringing the four together. He describes the object as being serviceable to distinguish what they are themselves by saying, of these. He sums up with the word thus, of both kinds, means both of its own, super deliberative and also super reflective forms. 45. The subtle object likewise terminates in unresolvable primary matter, alanga. In the case of the earthen atom, the fine element of odor, which is the cause of the atom of earth, is the subtle object of the reflective and super-reflective balanced states. In the case of the watery atom, the fine element of taste is the subtle object. In case of the fiery atom, the fine element of color. In case of the windy atom, the fine element of touch. In case of the aerial atom, the fine element of sound. Well, they had to represent what they perceived to be the case, didn't they? As we can't quite take these things quite literally there. The personality substance, which is the cause of these elements, is also the subtle object of this balanced state, resolvable primary matter as such, linga matra, which is the cause of this personality substance, also is the subtle object of the balanced state, unresolvable primary matter, which is the cause of this resolvable primary matter as such, also is the subtle object of the balanced state. And because of the unresolvable primary matter, there is nothing subtle. If the objection be raised that the self is subtle, the reply is that this is true. The subtlety of the self in relation to the resolvable primary matter Thinking substance is, however, not that of an unresolvable primary matter to the resolvable primary matter, for the self is not the material cause, anvayan, of resolvable primary matter, but is the instrumental cause, hetu. Accordingly, it is explained that the subtlety reaches its utmost degree in the primary substance, that is the balanced state, which has a thing to be known as its object, and in the subtle element only? No, but 45. The subtle object likewise terminates in unresolvable primary matter, alanga. That state, a fine element of odor which is in relation to the earthen atom, is the subtle object of the balanced state. Similarly, in the latter cases, also the connexion is to be made. The resolvable primary matter as such, langa matra, is the great principle, that is the thinking substance, buddhi, for it goes to dissolution, laya, in the primary substance. Unresolvable primary matter is primary substance, for it does not dissolve into anything. This is the meaning. He says that subtlety terminates in unresolvable primary matter. In the words, and beyond the unresolvable primary matter, there is nothing subtle. He raises a doubt by saying, if the objection be raised. That is to say, the self also is subtle, not the unresolvable primary substance alone. He rebutes this objection by saying, true. In other words, insofar as it is a material cause, there is in the unresolvable primary substance subtlety, but not in the other, that is, the self. In this case, since the purpose of the self is the instrumental cause of the great principle and of the personality substance and of the others, the self is also, like unresolvable primary matter, a cause. Having in mind the question as to how subtlety characterized in this way is to be understood as regards the unresolvable, he acts, however. He gives the answer in the words not that of the resoluble primary matter. True, the self is a cause, but not a material cause, for the self is not, like the primary substance, a cause of these states, insofar as one, as being the great or the other states, it enters into mutations. This is the meaning. He sums up in the words, accordingly as it is experienced that subtlety reaches its utmost degree in the primary substance. Now, you've heard me use the phrase a causal beings for created beings. And obviously they have a cause, right? But this is the sort of a causal that we mean. And we, our true selves, not this body, not the mind operating it, but the spirit soul that operates that, that is what's being referred to as a causal. And this is what we're trying to get at. What I meant by my white initiation, you're kind of stripping all that and trying to find out what you really are. What you really are, and living upon what you really are and what you really should be. Is that okay thing to consider here? 46. These same balanced states are the seated concentration. Let's not confuse this with prosperity gospel. Give the preacher a lot of money, and even more money will come back to you. It doesn't work that way. These four balanced states have external perceptible things as their seed. Therefore, the concentration is seated. Of these four, the deliberative and the superdeliberative refer to a coarse intended object, the reflective and superreflective to a subtle intended object. Thus, in four kinds, one after another, concentration has been enumerated, and in the four balanced states, the object of which is a thing to be known, he says that concentration conscious of an object may occur. 46. These same are the seated concentration. The word eva is out of place and should be understood after seated. As a result of this, or maybe he meant to put it there. As a result of this, the four balanced states, the object of which is the thing to be known, are limited insofar as they are seated. The seated state, however, is not limited to the thing to be known, since even in the case of the balance state of the object of which is known, or the process of knowing it persists, not being neglected by the distinction into the predicate relations and unpredicated relations, with reference to the thing to be known. So with regard to the thing to be known, there are 4 balanced states, and 4 in respect of the knower and the process of knowing, and thus there are 8 of these concentrations. The comment is explained by a mere reading. 47. When there is a clearness of the super-reflective balanced state, the yogin gangs, internal, undisturbed calm. When freed from obscuration by impurity, the sattva of the thinking substance, the essence of which is light, has a pellucid, steady flow, not overwhelmed by the rajas and tamas. This is the clearness. When the clearness arises in the super-reflective balanced state, then the yogin gains the internal undisturbed calm, that is to say, the vision by the flash, spota, okay, of insight, which does not pass successively through the serial order of the usual processes of experience, and which has as its intended object the thing it really is. And in this sense it has been said, as the man who has climbed the crag sees those upon the plain below, bhumistha, so the man of insight, who has risen to the undisturbed calm of the insight, himself escaped from pain, beholds all creatures in their pain. Of the 4 balanced states which have as their object the thing to be known, excellence belongs to the super-reflective balanced state, thus described in the Sutra 47, when there is clearness of the super-reflective, internal undisturbed calm. He describes the meaning of the word clearness by the words beginning with impurity. Impurity is an accretion of rajas and tamas, and it is the defilement which has the distinguishing characteristic of obscuration. Clearness is freed from this. The essence of which is light means naturally light. For this reason, the sattva of the thinking substance is not overwhelmed. The objection is made, this may be true. But if the balanced state has as its object the thing to be known, how could the undisturbed calm have itself as its object? To this he replies with the words, has as its intended object the thing as it really is. In other words, it does not have the self as its object, but as its substrate, attara. Does not pass successfully through the serial order means that it is simultaneous. On this very point he cites the teachings of the supreme sage, Paramarsim Gautam, with the words, and in this sense, seeing that he is above all by virtue of the perfection of his perceptive vision, he knows that the creatures are in their pain, accompanied by 3 kinds of pain. "48. In this calm, insight is truth-bearing. In one whose mind stuff is concentrated, the insight which arises in this calm receives the technical name of truth-bearing, and this is a term whose meaning is intelligible of itself. This insight bears truth and nothing else. In it there is not even a trace of misconception, and in this sense it has been said, by the sacred word and by the inference and by eagerness for practice in contemplation, in 3 ways he promotes his insight and gains the highest yoga. With regard to the same point, he gives the consensus of yogins by telling of this term current among yogins, which itself expresses the intended object. 48. In this, the insight is truth-bearing. The comment is easy. By the expression sacred word is meant the hearing, shravana, prescribed by the Vedas. By the expression inference is meant consideration, manana. Contemplation is reflection. Practice in this is following it up, one time after another. Eagerness for this is close attention to it. So in this way, absorption, nididhyasana, is described. But this insight has an object other than the insight resulting from things heard or from inferences, inasmuch as its intended object is a particular. A thing heard is knowledge derived from verbal communication. This deals with generic objects, for a particular cannot be connoted by a verbal communication. Why not? Because a word does not have its own conventional usage established by the particular. Similarly, inference deals with generic objects only. For instance, compare Book 1, verse 7. We say that there is getting to a place, there is motion, and where there is no getting to a place, there is not motion, and by an inference we get a conclusion in generic terms only. Therefore, no particular can be the object of verbal communication or of inference. Out of this subtle and hidden and remote thing, there is no knowledge by ordinary perception. Furthermore, we cannot assert that this particular has no validity and does not exist. Therefore, this particular as object, whether it belong to a subtle element or to the self, is apperceptible by the concentrated insight only. Consequently, this insight has an object other than the object of the insight resulting from a thing heard or from inference. Inasmuch as its intended object is a particular, the objection is made, this may be true, but the super-reflective balance state, which is produced by perfection of impressions, whose object refers to that which is known by verbal communication or by inference, can refer to go charayat only to the objects of verbal communication and of inference. For surely a subliminal impression is derived from experience of one object is not able to produce knowledge with regard to another. For that would be an unwarranted assumption. Therefore, if the super-reflective balance state is truth-bearing, verbal communications and inferences must also be assumed to be this, that is, truth-bearing. In reply to this, he says, 49, has an object other than the insight resulting from things heard or from inferences, inasmuch as intended object is a particular. For the sattva of the thinking substance is naturally bright. Although it has the power of seeing all intended objects, it becomes obscured by tamas. Only when by rajas it is set free to stream forth, then only does it know the object. But when, by practice and passionlessness, the defilement of rajas and tamas is cast off and it shines forth spotlessly clear, then passing beyond the limits of all measures, mana, and of all things measurable, maya, and having endless brightness, what then, pray, can there be that is not within its scope? He explains. The sutra, in the words, a thing heard is knowledge, derived from verbal communication. This deals with generic objects. Why? For a particular cannot be connoted by a verbal communication. For what reason? Because a word does not have its conventional usage established by a particular, since the word is an infinite, and since it has too wide a pervasion, vyabhichara, for we do not perceive the relation of word and thing and express in connexion with any particular substance instance of this word. And furthermore, the sense of the sentences cannot be such a particular, even in case of an inference which depends for its origin upon the knowledge of relation between the syllogistic mark, langa, and the subject of the proposition, langan. The same procedure holds good, as he says, similarly inference. In the expression of where there is no getting to a place, the words where and there should by logical conversion be made to indicate the pervaded and the pervader. Therefore, here and by an inference, we get a conclusion in generic terms only. He sums up with the word, therefore, it might be admitted that we have ordinary perception, irrespective of a knowledge of the relation between the word and the thing expressed, and that this perception does not deal with generic objects only. In reply to this, he says, and of this, no. It may not be admitted that the ordinary perception depends upon a knowledge of the relation of word and thing expressed, but it must be admitted that it depends upon the senses. And with this higher insight of the senses, have no pre-established harmony. This is the meaning. It is objected that if the individual is not within the scope of verbal communications and inferences and perceptions, then it does not exist, for there is no source of valid ideas for it. And in reply to this, he says, furthermore not. For a source of valid ideas is not necessarily a pervader nor a cause of the object of knowledge, paideia, to the extent that if that source of valid ideas should cause the object of knowledge would cease to be, for surely when the moon is a slender crescent, levant, those who accept sources of valid ideas do not doubt the real existence of the deer, which is situated in the other part of the moon's surface, not then visible. Okay, deer on the moon? Okay. Therefore, for this reason, it is apperceptible by the concentrated insight only. And here the atoms and the cells, which are subjected to this discussion, are endowed with a peculiarity peculiar to themselves, because, being substances, they are distinct from each other. Whatever things, being substances, are distinct from each other, these are endowed with particularly peculiar to themselves, like a cripple or a man with a shaven head, according to this inference, and to the verbal communication which is devoted to the teaching what the truth-bearing insight is. The particular individuality of this insight has been defined. Although the individual is described still in the absence of such a description, no doubt might arise, because it has been obtained by a line of reasoning. Yet insofar as it is not far or remote, this sattva is brought, with some difficulty, within the scope of verbal communication are of inference, but they do not make evident the existence of the particular by as direct an experience as words of connexion, for instance, through their application of gender and number, bring the meaning of the word and, within the scope of the verbal communication, are of inference. Therefore, it is established that this insight has an object other than the insights resulting from things heard or from inferences. And 50 and 51 will have to form a final video of Book 1. And then we will get into the means of attainment. And by the means of attainment, when we mention each other in prayer, let's mention each other without exaggeration. Namaste.